Posted by Godless Nomad. Let me start by saying I am a huge skeptic and can almost always find an explanation for supposed paranormal encounters. I don't believe in ghosts, and I'm pretty good at using logic and reason to debunk most stuff. But I can't explain this one. I've been trying to for years, and I just can't. Now, let's go back about 10 years, give or take. I was living in a house in a small town whose previous inhabitants all died of old age, natural causes. We rented the house, and the landlord was the eldest son of the previous inhabitants. I would hear footsteps in the attic pretty regularly and see orbs in the dining room often, but none of that is very substantial and is easily explained away. Orbs could easily just be dust in the sunlight, and footsteps are easily explained because we had 2 large dogs and 2 cats who had full roam of the house. That's not why I'm here though. The reason I'm posting tonight is to tell you about the time that I was laying in bed one night. I felt something I still can't make sense of. I was still wide awake, watching TV, scrolling whatever on social media platform I was using at the time, so this experience wasn't a dream or anything like that. My bed sat in the corner of the room with the headboard and one side against the wall. It was a small single, so it wasn't very big at all. I'm 6 foot 2 inches tall and took up most of the bed. I was laying on my side facing the TV with my back towards the wall, and the time was around 2 a.m. on a warm summer night. As I'm laying there relaxing, I felt the mattress compress behind me as if someone or something had sat down. I felt something touch my shoulder as well. I can only describe it as feeling like a hand gently placed on my shoulder. When I turned around to see what it could be, there was nothing behind me except for the wall, but I was able to see exactly where the mattress had compressed. I was able to see the indent in the mattress as if there was something with substantial weight sitting there, but there was nothing. A shiver ran down my spine, and I could feel a cold spot in the area that the thing was sitting. Only a second or two later, I felt the hand leave my shoulder and watched as the mattress decompressed. Whatever it had left, I quickly got out of bed, grabbed my blanket and pillow, and went downstairs to sleep on the couch. I didn't even turn off the TV. I stayed up all night thinking about this experience and trying to make sense of it. 10 years later, I'm still unable to make sense of it. That was the first and only time that I've ever experienced anything like this. As a skeptic, I don't want to believe that this was paranormal. I want to think that it was something explainable, but I simply can't explain it. I still think about it regularly and just doesn't make sense. I want to know what you think. I want to know if you ever had a similar experience, or if there is a possible explanation that I may be overlooking. Did something visit me that night, or is there a reasonable explanation that I just haven't thought of? What do you think? The one that I can't explain. Posted by Godless Nomad. Posted by Galska. Okay, so this will probably be my first and last post in this sub, as I am a non-believer, or was. The story goes back as long as I can remember, all back to my childhood, and I can't say for sure when exactly it started. Also, sorry if my English is bad, it's not my native language. My bedroom used to be on the first floor, just next to the front door. Next to the front door, we had 2 large windows going all the way to the floor on both sides. And I had a normal window in my bedroom, facing the same direction. In front of my window, I had some very sheer curtains in white, and next to the front door, there were no curtains. My bed was situated across from my door, with my bed facing away from the window. My pillow would approximately be 1 meter from the window. Anyway, what would sometimes happen was that I could hear footsteps, clear and loud footsteps, coming from one side of the front towards my window. Then the sound would abruptly stop, and sometimes I could also see the shape of a rather tall and big-built man outside my window. It was hard to say exactly how big, but from the shape I would say taller than a normal man, but with the same build. As a child, I used to compare the shape with Jaws from James Bond, as he had a similar shape and was very tall. Now, this sometimes happened, and my brother had his room across from me, but he barely slept there, as he was scared of the dark. Eventually, my dad moved there when he was snoring. My brother hasn't heard anything that he can remember, but he also moved upstairs before he hit his teens. This happened frequently, and several nights I would lay still for at least an hour or so, unable to move, as I was completely paralyzed with fright, thinking if I just lay still, the thing outside my window will either think my bed is empty or that I am sleeping and just go away. Eventually, I started to doubt myself and what I was seeing myself. As I had been told so many times, it was probably just my imagination. I opted to try to catch it in the act and tried to put something in front of the window in advance and then peek out in the hallway to see if I could see something walking past, but nothing. I also tried to use my web camera to record through the whole night, but never caught anything interesting. I tried to tell my parents, but they kept telling me it was my imagination and that I either was having a bad dream or my imagination was just taking it too far. Now, in their defense, I have a pretty vivid imagination and have been scared of lots of things that don't exist before. But I've never before or after heard or seen anything except for this walking man. And then there was this one night. I was sitting up chatting with online friends, and the time was about 3 a.m. I remember the time because I freaked out about it being 3 a.m. after watching The Exorcist for the first time. When there was someone trying to open the front door, 3 times they pushed down the handle, and I almost peed myself. I remember telling the group I was chatting with, thinking in case I die or something, please will find out what happened. After waiting for a bit, I ran over to the opposite room and woke my dad up, who I was happy was in that room that night. He didn't believe me and said I had been having a bad dream, but I had been completely awake and didn't even feel a bit sleepy. But after a bit, he agreed to come with me and brought a flashlight to see out the windows. Nothing nowhere. Then I moved away, and when I got back to visit my parents, I was wondering if I would still hear the steps, but I didn't. They had stopped, but I could never completely relax in that bed. Should maybe also add that when it was winter and snowy outside, I didn't just hear the footsteps, but the snow against shoe sound also, which just made it more real. But the next day, there wouldn't necessarily be additional shoe prints. So I want to add, we did not live in any city or something. I could walk into dense forest after taking about 30 steps. Now a friend I told this to said it might be a ghost or something, possibly looking after me. And at that time, I started to believe that story. Because a ghost, even if it was scary, was less scary than the alternatives. Now I'm not really sure what to believe. Was it a ghost? Was it a person? Or was I hallucinating? Or something for over 15 years? The man outside my window. Posted by the Rifleman _ of 96, and it goes as following. First off, I like to think of myself as a scientifically minded individual. I try to find any possible explanation for something before I immediately assume it's a ghost, but nobody that has stepped foot in my childhood home has left it without believing in ghosts. We moved into the house when I was about 5 or 6, and at first nothing really happened. The very first time I had any idea was after a year or so. On this night, I was laying in bed in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep. In my room, my bed is laid out in such a manner that the door is 90 degrees to my right as I'm laying down on my back. The door to my bedroom was open, as I'm from the south and we didn't have AC, so everyone had the windows open and the fans to let the house breathe. Anyway, as I'm laying there, unable to sleep, I turn my head to the right. Standing there in the doorway is the clear silhouette of a man. It did not have any features for me to see, just the outline. Even though I didn't see his face, I knew it was a man, and I knew that he was looking right at me. I froze in fear for what felt like an eternity, and eventually grabbed whatever was near to throw at the door to try to close it. I was unable to get it closed, so I eventually just rolled on my left side and hoped he would go away. Eventually, I got the courage to look, and he was gone, and I went back to sleep. That was just the beginning of my childhood paranormal encounters within the home. And to be clear, after growing up in the home, I now know the spirits in the house are not malicious or hurtful in any way. Sometimes they just want someone to know they're there and will make themselves known, but never in a bad way. It would break the app with the amount of stories I have about the house, but that is just the first one of many. Posted by Flaxen Flare. Before I start, here's a bit of context to my story. My husband and I lived in a small 2-floor house with 2 main entrances, one along the front and the other on the side of the house, which opens up into the laundry room. When we were too busy or it's too late to walk our dogs, we hook its collar onto a lawn line that's attached to one of the pipes on the corners of our house so we could use the bathroom. We used to do that from the door in our laundry room, but we noticed the large step from the door to the ground had been taking a toll on his hip. As a result, we started letting him out through the front door instead, since the porch is much closer to the ground. background. This particular night, I was home alone with my dog. It was around midnight when I decided to let him outside one last time before going to bed. I hook him up to his line, close the door, and lock it before heading into the kitchen to put away the dishes. This was pretty routine. If he used the bathroom quickly, he liked to walk around along the front inside of the house for a few minutes before coming back inside. As I'm putting away the dishes, I hear a scratch on the door. How my dog signals he wants to come back inside. So I head over to him to let him back in. Since I've watched way too many scary movies, I always look through the door's peephole before opening the door. Out of habit, I look to check the dog is in the front door. That I see a man staring very intently at the door handle. I freeze with my hand on the door handle. I don't know how much time went by, but then I heard another scratch. This one, louder than the last. This kind of wakes me up from my initial shock, and I run to grab my cell phone. I call my husband to tell him what's happening. He was very confused. I probably wasn't explaining the situation very well, but says that he's heading home. This is when I realized my dog is still outside with this person. I head back to the front door, trying to make as little noise as possible to check whether the stranger is still there. Just like before, he's standing there, head bowed, looking at the doorknob. I tiptoe over to the laundry room and slowly open the door as quietly as possible. I can't see my dog anywhere, and the side of the house is covered in gravel. I knew I couldn't step outside without making a lot of noise. With my heart still pounding in my chest, I go to the front door to keep an eye on the stranger and to get a better look at him. I consider calling the police, but I didn't feel they would take me seriously. Since all this man was doing was standing in front of my house, I tried to taking a picture of him with my cell phone, but my camera was only able to take pictures of the people and not the images behind the glass. All of a sudden, the man looks up directly at me. I swear he knew I was there. He glares at me, then opens his mouth to show the taunting, malicious grin. He stood there, that way, for a few seconds. With that, he turns around and starts to walk down the street. I stay in the same place, almost expecting him to rush back, start pounding on the door. Luckily, my husband got back after a few minutes. Long story short, he convinced me to call the police, and we went out looking for our dog. Turns out this man had cut the end of our line connected to the pipe, and our dog had decided this was a good time for him to explore my neighborhood backyard, which was where we found him. It's been 3 years since this happened. We've since moved to a new house, unrelated reasons, and the police weren't able to come up with any suspect. Ever since then, we take our dog on very long walk before the sun goes down. Posted by Flaxen Flare. A man pretended to be the family dog. Posted by Excuse You H. What? On Let's Not Meet. I apologize in advance since I'm not a good writer, but I'll do my best to share my experience. To better paint the picture, here's a description of myself at the time of this incident 3 years ago. 5'5", 26-year-old woman, medium length, bleach blonde hair, curvy, 175 pounds, wearing black, high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. 3 years ago, I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time, I lived in a rough part of a large city. I've had many sketchy situations that I have gotten myself out of, so I guess I felt sort of invisible, like nothing truly could happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety, just in case. About halfway home and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I noticed a van started tailing me. I was used to this, since in my city, it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to get propositioned for sex. It's embarrassing how desensitized to this I was. I did my usual and crossed the road so that I would be walking beside traffic, heading in the other direction. I wasn't scared, I was just annoyed. The van then turned on a side street, then back onto the road I was on, and pulled up to me. At this point, I still wasn't scared. Again, this has happened to me so many times, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more skin or if I was wearing a winter coat zipped from just below my chin all the way down to my ankle. That area is notorious for that type of activity. I decided firm and told the person sternly, I'm not interested. I noticed there were 2 men in the van. They looked almost identical. It may have been twins or brothers. Both men had a very, very dark complexion, dark eyes, short dark hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and crossed the road again to get away. At this point, I figured this could be enough for them to stop following me. They didn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a horny pervert to leave me alone. So this was when I started to feel unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to F off. I thought it finally worked. It had been 3 minutes, and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought I was in the clear. Just in case, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister that I live with. Just then, the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out of the van, opened the back door, and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, as if he was about to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in that area is very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagine that is what they were waiting for. Just as the man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You are being filmed in my live video chat. I gave my friends your license plate number and the police have been notified." I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused. He was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth, so I tilted the phone more as to give it the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped into the van and then sped off. Jeez. The post continues. I have never been the same since that night. I'm afraid of walking alone now, even in the daytime. Stay safe out there. Two creeps in a van. Let's never meet. I hope karma finds you both soon. Originally posted by Excuse You H. Watt. Posted by _chaoses. The Ford F-150. This happened about 5 years ago. I was around 16, 17 years old. I always enjoyed walking. I would spend at least 1 hour a day walking the roads around where I live. One day, I was out doing my normal route, walking down my street that my house was on, taking a right out to the main street and following it until I got to the end. There, I would cross the crosswalk and retrace my steps to go home. On this particular day, I was about 20 feet from where I would leave the main road on my journey back home. I had my headphones in, blasting music, as always, which can be a bad habit, as I am young, female, that has been put in some sketchy situations while going for my walks. Men chasing me, following me, etc. But since it was daylight, on the roads were pretty busy, I figured it was safe. But man, was I ever off with that assumption. As I was about to pass the entrance of the side street before leaving the main road, a black Ford F-150 pulled up. He stopped and gestured for me to walk in front of him, so I do so. I was going on my merry way when I barely heard someone trying to talk to me. I turned down my music, taking out my headphones as I looked to see the man in the black Ford still stopped at the entrance of the side of the road. I looked at him puzzled, trying to figure out if he was talking to me. I pointed at myself and he grinned, nodding. "What's a beautiful girl like you doing out here?" he asked. I laughed awkwardly. Walking?" I replied, seeing the answer should have been obvious. "It's a beautiful day for that," he commented, just seeming to make small talk. "Yeah," I started before going to turn around and continue my route. "Wait!" the man called. I stopped and turned around, just trying to be polite. Even though the encounter was odd, I didn't see too many red flags. The man then went off saying things such as, "You're so beautiful, you know you have a really nice body, this hot weather is nice for a hot girl." I grew incredibly uncomfortable at this point, seeing as this man had to be in his mid-40s. He had a bit of a receding hairline with black hair, a nose with a protruding bridge, blue eyes that were surrounded by slight wrinkles, and was dressed in a dress shirt. So I instantly brought up my age, saying, "I'm a minor. There has been multiple times I've been mistaken for being older than I was," hoping saying this would get his fully grown adult ass back off. But he didn't. "Oh, that's okay. Come here, sweetheart. Get in the truck." That's when I started panicking. Red flags shooting up everywhere. Stranger danger. I laughed nervously, looking at the cars around me to see if anyone was noticing what was happening. Nobody did. "No, that's fine. My house isn't far." "No, really. Get in the truck. I'll bring you home." "No. Come on. Just get in here with me," he called as I turned and started walking away. I was hoping he'd just drive off somewhere else, but he didn't. Instead, he drove extremely slow, following me, complimenting me, and trying to pressure me into his truck. I thought fast of multiple options for different scenarios, but I chose one, a simple one. I pulled my phone out while still walking. I lifted it up to my ear, pretending to loudly answer a call. "Hey, Dad? Yeah, no, I'm just on the enter street name here. I'll be home in about 10 minutes. I stopped pretending to listen to reply, "Okay, you're outside, waiting for me? Awesome, yeah, we can do that when I get back. Love you." After he heard me say that, he took off, tires screeching. I ran back home and made it back within about 6 minutes, actually calling my dad on the way, who made a call to the police, who showed up shortly after and took my statement and description. Turns out there was a man on the loose in my area who was exposing himself to minors and trying to pick up a sexual act, but they never actually found out who it was. So creepy, man. In the black Ford F-150, let's not meet again. An encounter with the unexplained. Posted by SpiderTuber6766. So, this is my personal experience. It has only happened once, and never again, but I'll never forget it. It was 4 years ago in 2018. It was a school night, as I was having trouble sleeping. I usually take a while to fall asleep, but this was like I physically couldn't sleep. So I decided to go use the bathroom. I browsed on the phone, on the toilet, and just went along with my business. The way the house was structured was there was a small hall connecting 2 rooms and the rest of the house. So when I walked back to the room, I look out the hall to the kitchen as I see it. In the kitchen was a glowing light. as it was a rectangle shape, floating, as it surrounded by a black mass of smoky substance. Now at first, I thought it was my fridge, but it was on the wrong side of the kitchen. Then I started to think of other reasons as it stared right at me. We kept eye contact for a minute, as I was so scared I didn't even think of filming with the phone. But I couldn't be staring all night. I need sleep, and school is tomorrow, so I make a run for my room. As I shut the door, I feel it at the door, as it closed the big distance of the house in just a second. I didn't even lock the door. I didn't care, and just jumped in bed and hid under my sheets. Next thing I knew, it was inside my room. I didn't even hear the door open. It floated above my bed as it breathed down my neck. It soon laid in bed with me, as I was petrified to move. The next morning, it was gone, as I slept with that thing all night. I tell my family and friends, as my mother told me, it was a guardian angel. I'm still not sure what I saw. My rational explanation, I was just tired. I was hallucinating because of it. It wasn't a dream or sleep paralysis, because I was moving and awake. I had another small experience with the same being as it slept in my bed again, as I just didn't try to do anything, and the next morning it was gone again. Haven't seen or felt it since. My brain thought it was the shape of a human with a long black body, and the light was its face. If you know what I saw, please tell me, because I will not let this rest. I know what I saw was a real being. We were both aware of each other. We both knew we saw each other, so I must know. Was it a ghost, a shadow person, an alien, angel or demon? Whatever it was, I'm just glad it was friendly. From Redditor. You destroy all mole-mans. Let's set the scene. It's an island in the Philippines. Now you're probably imagining old-growth forests and jungle, but the wilderness on this island was mostly palm forest and swampland, if one was pressed for classification. As you will find on most Visayan islands, there was a beachy resort area with a few tourists, lodgings of varying quality. Catering to the tourist at said establishment were rental places, renting out vehicles of even more varying quality. I, being young and therefore both poor and foolhardy, rented the cheapest Chinese-made dirt bike in the town. I used said dirt bike lightly for a day around the beach, and in unwitting preparation for my great adventure the following day. A component in the brake had to be replaced at the shop. Now you see, I'd seen some maps, and there was a second town, Town B, with a beach several hours distance away by a provincial highway. The highway itself took a large detour around the area of the forest, skirting the coast and keeping as far away from the area as possible, without physically propelling yourself into the ocean. However, there was a map sneakily hidden in the darkest corner of a local restaurant that told a different story. The map was faded, as the mining or plantation venture it was produced for had long since folded, but behind the brown tinge in the 60s typography was the unmistakable dotted line of a trail cutting from one curve of the highway to another, eliminating half the distance. So the next morning I got up bright and early to drive to Town B, packing some beach gear and making sure not to pack something totally unnecessary like a torch. I trundled along the highway for a little while, being passed at breakneck speeds by trucks and jeeps belching black smoke, until I turned my truck off. The initial part of the secondary road was cement, good sign, and I followed it through some villages. Rice paddies gave way to more and more palm trees, and the road itself became gravel. With every passing mile, the houses became scarier, the palm trees became denser, and the road became wetter. More rutted, more orange with clay. Roughly 90 minutes passed between the final house I saw on the side and the first one I saw on the other. The road itself was literally walking track in width for a good 45 of those minutes. All mud and rock, with deep drainage marks crisscrossing the surface, puddles elsewhere. One pool was almost an engine killer in depth and length, and required a lot of coaxing to get the bike not to suffocate. I was absolutely filthy. My wrists and biceps were aching. My teeth were almost rattled out of my gums. But I had made good time, and it was not even noon yet when I reached Town B. Going from A to B had been a complete success, so as you can imagine, I strutted around the beach all afternoon with the smuggest expression humanly possible. Anyway, during the afternoon I decided I could backtrack through the same route because I'd done it once, and if you do something once, you can definitely do it again. By the time I reached the last house on the side of Town B, it was late afternoon. Logically, I sped up, because the secret to avoiding the dangers of reduced visibility is to outrun it. Now, the back of the bike was bouncing around like wild, but I was making good time. That was until part that was fixed the previous day gave way again. Of course, that wasn't immediately clear at the time. What it felt like was the bike making a hard right into the foliage, while I clung out with one hand until the side of the bike went thunk into the tree and thunked me off into the mire. I went flying one way, landing on my back, and the bike went bouncing another, landing quite miraculously on the road, or however you describe it. I don't know if you're meant to pass out after that kind of thing, because my body did the opposite, and I basically flung myself on the bike to get it upright. Unfortunately, adrenaline can only do so much, and I soon felt this ridiculously intense throbbing rising from my right leg. My kneecap took full force of the tree trunk, and basically all the skin was hanging off. Bone and muscle was not visible, but a lump of skin about the size of my palm was hanging down, and the kneecap itself was visibly strange. Later I learned it was fractured in several places. I fell on my ass when I realized the enormity of being absolutely unable to walk the distance necessary to get help. Amazingly, the bike motor was still running, and although basically the brake pedal and the protrusions on the right side were bent up against the bike, and every piece of bodywork was hanging off. The only fundamental problem with the bike was the broken rear axle. In a stroke of luck that could only have come from a divine power, the axle rod that had been taken out of the bike the previous day was still in the tool set provided in the storage. I know it sounds contrived, but rather than fix the issue, the owner had replaced one axle with an even older axle, taken 5 to do so, and put the existing and pretty much fine one back in the toolkit. In the last light of the day, I took apart the rear of the bike and replaced it with parts as best I could with my limited knowledge in motorcycles. By now, dusk was becoming night. I still had what was 1 hour of driving during the day to complete, and my leg was pretty much stained red with blood and pretty much immovable. It took a good while and a good deal of struggling to even mount the bike. However, practically everything else was hand operated, including the ignition, so it was drivable. Drivable in a sense because the lights were broken and it was pitch black rainforest, covered in puddles and rocks and vines. In hindsight, it may have been smarter to wait the night, but I gunned the throttle and started moving as slow as was possible without stalling. Now the night happened to be clear and the moon was gigantic, so there was a slight but noticeable amount of light shining down on the road. The human eye is amazing when it comes to that, and every passing minute, moving at walk pace, the path became clearer. This means one vaguely lighter shade of gray compared to another, but it was enough to avoid rolling off the beaten track too often or making further thunks against trees. Throttle, idle, more throttle, clear a rock, idle. Really ridiculously slow for hours, until I hit the largest puddle that I'd met last time. This was quite visible, with the moon reflecting off of it. I wasn't really in any position to push the bike across, so I crossed my fingers and let the bike roll in and drove as straight as possible. All was fine until the last meters of the puddle, where to my horror, there was a patch of deep mud I had avoided before. The rear wheel got stuck deep. My leg is destroyed, so there's no way I can brace myself and manhandle the bike out. Having come so far, I got absolutely animalistic and forced all my weight forward on the handlebars, while gunning the throttle as hard as it will go on the lowest gear. The bike starts to smell like burning, but gradually the rear wheel wrenches itself forward and slide out of the deep mud with all the fury of an old-timey deity they'd sacrificed children to. And then I tipped over, face first, into some shallow mud. Anyway, it got easier from there, and at about 5 a.m., I dragged my sorry muddy ass through the gates of a local clinic who patched me up, and then called an ambulance that took me to an even better clinic. The owner settled the damage for literally $50 because the dodgy bike repair was obviously to blame, and he didn't want to be chewed out or extorted by the police. Destroy all mole mans. Escape in a jungle by biking with a broken leg. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommates that even the drug dealers in my city were playing. But all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park, quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night. even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street, on my side, was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to waltz, but he finished each box with odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass by me. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky, and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still, until I could make out his face. His eyes were open, wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my track. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me, but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again, but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The streets and the sidewalk ahead were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance in the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had to move fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time, staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took a giant, exaggerated tiptoe steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point, I ran away, or pulled out my pepper spray, or my cell phone, or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me. And then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling, his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it on my own voice, and that only made me more afraid, but he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there, smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around very slowly and started dance walking away, just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way, and this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off the side of the road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see a stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months. After that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk. He didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane. And that's a very, very scary thing to see. Posted by blue_title, a terrifying encounter with the smiling man. Welcome back to Reddit's Dark Side. This story comes from another podcaster and Reddit user, and you can find his podcast called You Are the Host. Creepy dude on a bike. For context, I'm a 26-year-old male and have a larger build, not fat, but also not muscular, just have a bigger look to me. I have lived an unusual life and have been through many iffy situations with people, so I am not frightened easy by odd or wacky people. I also can defend myself pretty well in a fight. I live in a city with pretty bad crime and work on a sketchy side of the town. While not the most crime-filled, it is still sketchy, and you get shady people once in a while. I also am a fan of the dark light, so I love walking at night and do not really get scared. I work a second shift job, and it is my duty as one of the supervisors to lock the gates after the sun goes down, and all the day shift people are gone. Our work is enclosed with a fence that has barbed wire on top of it. Just a few days ago, I was walking too close to the gate. I was coming from the far side of the parking lot after throwing something away in the dumpster. As I was walking to the gate, I could see a strange man on a bike. It is dark and cold out at this time of year, at 8 p.m., so I found it odd to see a man that was at least 30 or 40 on a bike. But I carried on as it could just be a man going to work or leaving work who doesn't have a car. As I continue to walk, I see he is now doing circles in the road at the end of the little driveway that leads to the fence. Now my guard is up, as this is strange to me. As I reach the fence, he has now set down the bike and is looking at me and walking toward me. He is shaking like I've seen many people on drugs do before. I'm still not super worried, as like I said, I have dealt with many shady people before. I close one side of the gate quick and rush to the other, swinging it closed. The gate is locked by a chain and a padlock, so I grab both sides of the chain. Before I can get the padlock through, the man sticks his hand through the fence and grabs me by the shirt. At this point I yelled, "Get the F off of me before I beat your ass." As it was, I was holding the fence closed with the chains while he grabbed me and yelled, "I'll effing kill you." The only thing going through my mind was how I was going to get the upper hand on this dude, and if I should fight him or wrap the damn chain around his neck. I was fortunate and the police officer just turned the block as this was going down and flipped his lights on and quickly took the man down and cuffed him. While the man was in his car, he questioned me and got a statement, and I was on my way. So to the druggie who wanted to kill me, even though I know I'll run into more one way or another, let's not meet again. Again, shout out to You're the Host podcast. Check them out. Bahia Honda State Park in the Florida Keys. My stepbrother and I are 15 years old, and our parents are being boring, wandering around the park looking at trees and whatnot. We decided to steal the keys to our 16-foot skiff that was beached and go for a joyride. We pushed the boat off the shoreline and into shallow water. We kept bumping on the bars under us because there was a big slack tide at the time, so we decided just to wait before dropping the prop so we wouldn't ruin it. We let ourselves drift out a ways from shore. Now we were maybe 200 yards from shore, and I can't see the bottom anymore, so we decided to drop the outboard into the water. Only the thing won't budge. We are pushing and pushing on it, but it just won't go into the water no matter what we do. We are still drifting because there was a very big slack tide that was just pulling our boat further and further from shore. At the time, we decided we had better drop the anchor so we don't drift anymore. The anchor line was no more than 10 feet long, and when we dropped it, it didn't slow down. At that point, we surmised the water was already too deep for it to hit anything. We pushed off from the beach at about 1:30 p.m., and it was now around 6 p.m. The shore was more or less just a line on the horizon, and the trees were barely discernible. This was a while ago. I'm an old man, so we didn't have cell phones handy like most kids do these days. As part of the rental agreement, the boat was not supposed to be out past sunset, so it didn't have any running lights or a radio. Our parents, we later found out, knew of our distress pretty quickly and were watching the boat from shore, trying to figure out what we were doing. Once night hit, everyone knew we were in trouble. As the sun was almost set, we saw a light blinking in the breaks between the waves. It was pretty far away. It was coming more or less towards it. It ended up being a really teeny little, for lack of a better term, make-it-yourself sailboat, crewed by a father and his kid. It was smaller than even our boat, which was teeny and really not made for the ocean. The guy stopped when he saw us frantically yelling at him and threw us a line. We told him our trouble, and he jumped on our boat. After making some tinkering, was able to get our prop to drop into the water. We were saved. He had his boat tied to the back of our boat, so we didn't want to start the prop till he got his away, but it was in the water. After he was about 10 feet away, we turned the key and it was dead. We shouted at him once we realized we couldn't fix it ourselves, but he had put his own outboard motor in the water, and he took his sails down. He was heading back home and didn't hear us. We shouted and waved to the boy in his boat, who was maybe 6 or 7. He was watching us while Dad had his back to us and waved back at us. They got further and further away until they were gone. We tried what we could, but the key would just not power the boat at all. Later we find out the battery on the boat was dead, wouldn't have been able to power a radio anyway. I forgot to mention, this was New Year's Eve. We knew it was midnight because of the fireworks show we saw light up the horizon. We saw other lights on the horizon too. Police boat, red and blue lights flashing, except they were on the Caribbean side of the island. The wrong side, we were drifting south, and they were looking for a teeny boat with no lights drifting north. Later, we found out the park ranger at Bahia Honda had told them bad information as to how to find us when our parents tracked him down and pleaded for help. We ended up being found by a Coast Guard rescue boat around 7 a.m. and we're back at the station in time to eat all of the station guys' breakfast cereal. We had drifted nearly 40 miles during the night, about halfway to Cuba. Several times throughout the night, huge cargo ships would pass relatively close to us. Since we were in the international shipping lane, we wouldn't have even registered as a bump to them and wouldn't have been seen without any lights. One really heartbreaking thing was seeing all the boats whiz by us all day and night, waving at them, but none other than that one sailboat guy, his son stopped, saw us, or even got close enough to us to realistically see us. We probably just looked like we were fishing or something. We would shout at everyone just because we had nothing else to try. So between that, my whistle blowing, and no fresh water, neither of us had any voice at all by the time they found us. The worst part of the entire evening for both of us was knowing that Darren, my shipmate, Dad, swam after us. At around hour 4 or so, he decided he could swim out to us and help. He was an excellent swimmer, and back then was in pretty great shape. He estimated at the time he dove in to get us, we were about a mile away. He swam as fast as he could out to us and made it fairly close. But the surf was pretty high that day. He made it close enough to us that we heard him shouting out at us and gave us such a feeling of relief we were going to be fine when he got to us, even though his head was still relatively a speck in the waves. He never made it to the boat though, and then we stopped hearing him shouting our names. This was Darren's dad, and it brought upon a serious feeling of guilt. Where was he? We were both crying because we thought he was dead, and it was our fault because he tried to swim out after us. We both, at different times, jumped in and swam around looking for him, out of desperation more than sense. Neither of us swam very far from the boat because of the dark. That boat is all you really have between you and the now very cold water. We didn't have any towels or anything on the boat besides our clothes, and poor Darren didn't even bring a shirt with him, so we used my shirt the best we could for warmth. Throughout the night, we would cry and talk about death and what each other would do. There was no radio on the boat, but there was a red whistle that was on the keychain. I blew the mother effing thing all night long and channeled with my 7th grade shop class teacher, Wally Luke, who taught me Morse code. I blew SOS for hours and hours. When the Coast Guard guy finally found us, the first thing he yelled was that he was going to bust whoever has been making all that dang racket with the whistle all night. Posted from nah_dude_nah.